about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
Numerous nuclear and military facilities around Iran have mysteriously exploded or caught fire over the past few weeks, and Israel's Mossad is taking responsibility. Many fear Israel is trying to bait Iran into a military conflict, which means the U.S. could end up at war with the country. So let's go over this string of attacks. Now, there have been numerous attacks, dozens of attacks, in fact, or I should say mysterious explosions, mysterious fires that have broken out all around Iran over the last several months. But just in the last 2 weeks, let's go over what's gone on just in this little time frame. June 26th, there was a blast at a ballistic missile complex. June 26th, there was a fire at a power plant causing a blackout. June 30th, there was an explosion at a clinic in Tehran responsible for 19 deaths. That included 15 women and 4 men. July 2nd, there was a blast and a fire at the Natanz nuclear facility. That one was a big one. And that is, all of these attacks had been going on, and these explosions and these fires. And finally, when the Natanz nuclear facility had the explosion there, the Iranians could no longer really turn a blind eye to what was going on. July 3rd, there was a large fire that broke out in Shiraz. July 4th, there was an explosion and fire at a power plant. Another one, July 4th, there was a chlorine leak at a petrochemical plant. July 7th, there was a blast in an industrial zone outside of Tehran that resulted in 2 deaths. July 12th, a fire broke out at a petrochemical plant. July 14th, an aluminum factory caught fire. July 15th, a large fire broke out at a shipyard. So you can see this is a lot of fires, a lot of explosions, and it's happening at, interestingly, nuclear facilities, power plants, kind of industrial factories like aluminum factories, petrochemicals. So these have all been happening. It's been a string of attacks. The Iranian people very much know that they're under attack. They say that they guess each day. They wake up each day and they guess which one's going to explode next or which place is going to catch on fire next. So this is not lost on everybody over there what is going on. Now, for a while there, the Iranians were pretty much publicly denying any sort of sabotage, even though the reports were coming out that the officials in Iran were suspecting it. They publicly were just saying, oh, these were just freak accidents that kept happening over and over and over again. But when the big explosion happened at the nuclear power plant at Natanz, they really couldn't turn a blind eye to it anymore. And they had to say, look, okay, we're under attack. And how do we know it was the Israelis? Well, they pretty much have admitted to it. A Middle Eastern official told the New York Times that Israeli intelligence were responsible for the nuclear facility explosion. And the Israeli foreign minister, Gabi Ashkenazi, said at a press conference on July 5th that in regard to Iran, he says, quote, we take actions that are better left unsaid, unquote. So he was kind of alluding to this happening. Well, also, a former Israeli defense official told Business Insider that it was common knowledge in Israeli intelligence circles that at least some of the events in Iran over the past month were the work of Israeli intelligence operations. He says, quote, "I don't know which ones exactly and wouldn't tell you anyway, because the entire point is for the Iranians to feel considerable stress trying to decide what might have been our work," they said. Then the Israeli media, so this was an anonymous person that Business Insider said they knew who it was. New York Times said they knew who it was, but this was an anonymous person that they weren't revealing their identity to the rest of us. But the Israeli media came out and confirmed that it was Mossad's head, Yossi Cohen, who was behind the leaks. Apparently, Avdor Lieberman, he's a prominent member of the Knesset. He said during a radio interview, quote, "An intelligence official says that Israel is responsible for an explosion in Iran on Thursday. The country's entire security echelon knows who it is. I expect the prime minister to shut the leaker's mouth, especially since he has started his Likud primary campaign." So he didn't say directly who it was, but then everybody in the media in Israel knew who he was talking about. So they revealed the name of the guy. So it's the head of Mossad, Yossi Cohen. He's also, by the way, Cohen has been mentioned as a potential successor to Netanyahu if Netanyahu doesn't, eventually Netanyahu's not going to be in power at some point, not sure when. He keeps losing elections but remaining in power. So, and that's a whole different, if you don't know what's going on with their elections and they're constantly in a stalemate over there in Israel, there's some other videos that you can watch, and those links are down below. Now, why would Israel be attacking Iran? Well, one theory is they've just decided to take matters into their own hands. So they've realized that we're not coming to a nuclear agreement with Iran, and so they've just decided to go ahead and start sabotaging Iran's nuclear plants and power plants and other facilities just in order to halt them from making any progress with their potential nuclear program. That's one theory. The explosion at Natanz definitely puts them back a couple of years. So it's a pretty legitimate theory. However, what we know is that we've been trying to goad Iran into a war for quite some time. And there is a theory that the Israelis, working alongside with some American operatives, realize that right now, you know what, the world's not paying attention to anything except for the virus. So now is a really good time to start poking the bear and seeing if we can get them to actually make a move. We were trying to get them into a war for quite some time, especially when Bolton was in office in the Trump administration. When John Bolton was in there, he's a big warmonger. But Iran was never really taking the bait. We took out General Soleimani, and Iran kind of retaliated with sort of a show and nothing that would result in war. There was a big worry that we were about to go to war at that time. And nothing has worked. There's been nothing to really get them to take the bait and to go to war. And now, with everybody focused on the virus, now if these explosions were happening in Iran, you got to think, a year and a half ago, especially around the time when General Soleimani was killed, if these explosions were happening around that time, you could imagine it would be front and center news every single day. But right now, everybody's focused on the virus. So right now is a really good time for the Israelis to, under the radar, start to sabotage Iran, to start to try to poke them and prod them. Now, flip the tables around. If the United States started to have all these fires and these explosions, and we knew it was Iran that was behind them, we would already be at war. If Iran was doing this to the Israelis, going in and blowing up some of their facilities and setting fires inside of Israel, we would already be at war. But Iran does it, and we're poking them and poking them and poking them. And finally, if they do eventually retaliate and say, okay, fine, enough is enough, and they hit us back, suddenly we're going to say, oh, they deserve it. Look at what they've done. It's time to go to war with them. And because the American public is not paying attention to all of these attacks that are happening on Iran, if Iran retaliates, that's the only news people are going to get. They're not going to hear about all of these explosions and fires that were made against Iran in order to bait them into this war. They're only going to hear about Iran attacking. Iran attacks Israel, or Iran attacks the United States, and now this means war.
RT America in our nation's capital. This is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Sanchez. I want to welcome all of our viewers from all over the world, including those of you who are watching us on your phones using the free portable TV app. All right, so I want to begin with something that kind of puts things in perspective from just a day ago. Yesterday on this very show, we had a guest. He's a professor, a noted professor, Peter Kuznick, professor of history at American University. And what he said to us was, and he was very adamant about this, he was adamant about his fears that the Trump administration could conduct military strikes before the new Biden administration is sworn in January. In fact, I want you to hear him say it in his words. Here it is.
But I'm pretty terrified right now. Trump's behavior has been so erratic, so impulsive, so out of control, beginning with that first presidential debate, which he went storming around this stage there and seemed to be completely out of control, up through behavior now, denying reality. This is a man who still has access to the nuclear codes and is going to have them for almost 2 more months. To me, that's much, much too dangerous.
We didn't think much of it when we heard him say it because others have perhaps postulated the same. However, less than 24 hours after conducting that interview, we're now hearing reports that the United States may be getting ready to strike Iran. And there are also reports that Israel may be kind of in on it. They have been preparing for this possibility of this said strike against Iran before Trump leaves office for quite some time, in fact. Now, are we talking about a war with Iran? Is that really what we're talking about before Trump leaves office? And if not, then we have to ask, what would it be? What shape would this take? These are obviously important questions. There's obviously a lot to drill down on, and we're going to do just that right here.